It is Tuesday, September 5th, 2023 at Protestia Studios and probably wherever you are as well. Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Intelligence Briefing for this Tuesday, the 5th of September. Hope you had a good Labor Day, good weekend with family and got a chance to relax and enjoy some time together. We're going to get right back into it, back into the fray on this Tuesday. Go over to protestia.com to read all of these articles and subscribe to the Insurgency email list. Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Protestia. If you are so led and believe this ministry is edifying to you and something valuable that needs to continue, we would very much appreciate your financial support. Only $5.95 a month. Into the headlines. First headline at protestia.com. United Church head rewrites Psalm 51 reading as Bathsheba's lament, her response to David's sexual abuse. We probably should have put sexual abuse in quotes as well, because that's not indicated by the actual text of the scripture itself. 3 months ago, the General Synod of the United Church of Christ elected the Reverend Karen Georgia Thompson as the first woman and the first black woman to lead the denomination as general minister and president. Thompson was the former associate general minister for Wider Church Ministries, co-executive for Global Ministries, who also previously served as the denomination's minister for racial justice and ecumenical and interfaith relations. Now, let me just start off with this. If your denomination has a minister for racial justice and ecumenical and interfaith relations, you're already off the rails. And of course, this goes on to demonstrate that this past Roe Sunday, as in Roe v. Wade, Roe Sunday, she gave a recital from Psalm 51, the well-known lament from David after the prophet Nathan confronted him about his sin with Bathsheba and his complicity in killing Uriah. Rather than quote the scripture verbatim, the denomination has been rewriting the texts as part of their Living Psalm project, which reimagines the Psalms from a, quote, contemporary justice perspective. Now, again, we'll stop here for a second to point out that rewriting the Word of God itself is a grievous sin. Grievous sin. We're not just talking about misinterpreting it or even having a mildly different interpretation or something like this. We're talking about changing the text itself to say what you want it to say. I mean, I guess we could say at least they're being open and honest about what they're doing. It's not just we're going to change the meaning of the. We'll read the Bible as it's actually written and change the meaning. They're like, wait, you know what? We were going to change the meaning anyway. Why not just change the words themselves? And that's what they've gone and done. Thompson alters the verses from the perspective of Bathsheba, who was apparently, according to her, raped and brutalized by David, and now has to hear him with his crocodile tears and false confession. So I guess they're claiming that David's lament in Psalm 51 was a false confession. He wasn't actually repentant. In Bathsheba's lament, she asked the Lord to wash away the trauma coursing through my veins and cleanse the dirt of sexual violations from my body, all while insisting I was born innocent, a whole person when my mother conceived me. My heart was created clean. My spirit was new and right within me. Blasphemies all of those statements. You were not born innocent. No, nobody aside from Christ was born innocent. Well, Adam was born innocent and Eve was. They weren't born, though, created, of course. They were innocent prior to the fall. But everybody who has been born of a woman, aside from Jesus Christ, was not born innocent, was not a quote-unquote whole person, was actually dead in their trespasses and sins, and their heart was not created clean, and their spirit was not new and right within them. You can go over here to Protestia to read this horrible rendition, this horrible rewriting of the words of God into the words from the imagination of Karen Georgia Thompson. I would normally play it for you, but we don't have the time. We're moving on. Next article, landmark survey. Most Church of England priests support premarital sex and gay marriage. I can't say I'm surprised by this. A majority of Church of England priests want same-sex marriage to be embraced by the denomination and to end their prohibitions on premarital sex, according to a landmark survey of 1,200 Church of England priests conducted by The Times. That is the Times UK. Most respondents say embracing the secular maxim will stem and stall 50 years of declining attendance, clearly learning nothing from the trail of dead and croaking mainline denominations that have gone before them. For decades, the deplorable Anglican denomination has been drifting on issues of theology and human sexuality, led by Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is a simpish and effete hireling. The Church of England long ago abandoned all biblical fidelity, proving time and time again millions of members are not the least bit committed to upholding the biblical teachings. Now, let me stop here for a second. There is an Anglican church in North America, which is not apparently under the leadership or direct relationship with the Church of England, or I guess traditional institutional Anglicanism, not under Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so we're not lumping them in this article describing this poll where Anglican clergy think that gay marriage is okay. Described as most wide-ranging poll carried out among frontline Anglican clergy, first survey of Church of England clerics conducted in almost a decade, it found that the majority support among priests for a change in law. This must be the law or the rules of the Church of England, and Anglicanism proper, or Anglicanism traditional, however you want to say it. But they want a change in law to allow priests to marry gay couples, with 53.4% in favor versus 36.5% against, suggesting that more than 10,600 of the church's 20,000 priests would back it, along with over 80% embracing the idea of the Archbishop of Canterbury being a woman, a remarkable shift in growth, given that women were only allowed to become bishops within the denomination 9 years ago. The survey also reports that 62.6% of priests say that the church should drop its opposition to premarital sex, 21.6% backing an end to the teaching, 41% saying it should drop opposition, but only for people in quote-unquote committed relationships. At this rate, a schism is all but inevitable and quite frankly well-deserved. And I don't know exactly how old the Anglican Church in North America is, or Anglican Church of North America. I'm not sure exactly how it's said, but there's already been a bit of a schism and a split, and you found that more faithful and biblically orthodox Anglican churches, especially in North America for sure, have broken off from the Church of England at this point. Read more at protestia.com. Next headline: all charges withdrawn against pastor who spent 18 days in jail for opening church during COVID. So this is Tim Stevens, and shortly, what was it? A few weeks ago, we had reported that the charges against James Coates had all been dropped as well. Apparently, there were some court rulings in Canada that made all of the charges against these men and any pastors in similar situations, basically in a situation where the government was not going to be able to continue its religious persecution of these men. Days ago, Alberta's Crown prosecutors withdrew all remaining charges against Pastor Tim Stevens, the Fairview Baptist pastor, imprisoned for refusing to shut down his church service or abide by public health orders, demanding his gatherings be limited on account of COVID. So this is a press release by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, and they released an announcement saying that they were pleased to announce all charges for violating public health orders against Fairview Baptist Church have been withdrawn by Crown prosecutors. In early 2021, charges were laid against Pastor Tim Stevens and Fairview Baptist for violating public health orders, which included mandates regarding gathering limitations, masking, and social distancing. This is certainly something to be praising God for. The fact that this persecution is at least, I would say, not necessarily ended, but at least paused for now. Our goal should be, as believers, to never let men and churches like this step out on their own anymore, and rather all faithful churches need to stand behind the support of the authority of Jesus Christ over the church and not the civil magistrate, regardless of what churches might decide about the next pandemic or the next public health emergency or whatever. The important thing is that we say with one unified, loud voice that Jesus is the authority in the church. Jesus is in charge of his church, not the government, not Caesar, not the civil magistrate. You can read more about this over at protestia.com. Next headline: groomer pastrix. Jackie Lewis said, children have a right to privacy about their sexuality and gender identity. This is a day ago by Paul Brown. Queer Universalist pastrix Jackie Lewis of New York City's middle churches, so far to the left that if the theological spectrum of Orthodox Christianity were a baseball field, she would be firmly planted in the stands adjacent to left field, or perhaps tailgating in the parking lot. Jackie believes in a false universalist gospel whereby those who hold her leftist views are the embodiment of the second coming of Christ. Her doctrine essentially denies the future physical return of Christ in favor of what could best be described as liberation theology, and queer theology meets full preterism. Lewis affirmed abortion and supports all manner of sexual deviancy within the church. In February 2020, the Pastrix and her Black Lives Matter supporting theological co-belligerents even performed a Trayvon Martin-themed communion service that included Skittles and Arizona iced tea in lieu of the Orthodox practice of the Lord's Supper. So, a grievous sin, grievous error coming out of Middle Church. New York City's Middle Church. And more information here about who they are and what she has taught. They are still fundraising to rebuild. Now, why are they rebuilding? Well, because their building burnt to the ground. Less than a year after Middle Church performed this abominable desecration of a church ordinance and supported the destructive June 2020 protests of Black Lives Matter, God saw it fit that their building would burn to the ground. Now they're fundraising to rebuild. They have a dual affiliation with the United Church of Christ and the rapidly leftward trending Reformed Church in America. Both denominations tolerate apostate churches like Middle Church, favoring man-centered, eisegetical messages that are sin-affirming over sound doctrine. So let's see if it has a clip here of exactly what she says. No, it's not a clip. It's a tweet. Actually, I remember this. This was a few days ago, like a week ago. She tweeted out, "Parents do not own their children. Kids are people, not things. They have a right to privacy." That's the kids, she's saying. "Have a right to privacy about their sexuality and gender identity, to choose when and to whom they share these intimate details about their life." Which is hot garbage. It's not what the Bible teaches. You see it in Ephesians 5, right? Actually, it's Ephesians 6. "Children, obey your parents." Which is, we should juxtapose versus "wives, submit to your husbands." The word for submit and the word for obey are different words, and obey indicates you can't ask questions, child. You are not your own person. You are under the authority. I tell my kids around here, I tell my boys that whenever they try to bring up, "you can't tell me what to do," kind of ideas, I say, "No, I can tell you what to do," and I do. This is not a democracy in this household. This is a benevolent dictatorship, and I am the benevolent dictator. Of course, under the much more benevolent and holy and perfect benevolent dictatorship of Jesus Christ. But in my house, I am the dictator. They don't get to make those decisions. And this person, this Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis, hates children, obviously. Hates children, to just throw them out there and say, "You're not under your parents anymore. Do whatever you want." It's so hateful. Go over to Protestia to read more of this. But suffice to say, Jackie Lewis Middle Church are virtually indistinguishable from the secular world. They are a synagogue of Satan that peddles a poisonous doctrine of demons to be marked and avoided. Next headline: Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ sequel sets production date of January 2024. So here we got a picture of Mel Gibson and Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus in the original Passion of the Christ, which was like 2004, I think. Veteran Hollywood critic Jordan Rumi has reported that the Passion of the Christ sequel is set to film in January 2024, and that the production date seems set in stone. Yep, released in 2004 by director Mel Gibson, the original film grossed over $600 million worldwide on a $30 million budget. Mixed response within the Christian community, with many praising it and even using it as an outreach tool, and others attending showings to hand out tracts against it, railing against it for its explicit Roman Catholic theology, the inclusion of that weird little demon baby, I've almost forgot about that, and the fact that it breaks the second commandment. Now, many will say, hey, it breaks the second commandment because it's a graven image. It's a graven image of Jesus. I would argue it breaks the second commandment because if it mischaracterizes Jesus as a person, mischaracterizes his nature, what he did, what he said, now we're in a second commandment violation. I'm not convinced that you're breaking the second commandment if you rightly proclaim the true Jesus, his true works, his true nature, and how things truly happened. Even in a dramatization, I'm not convinced that is a second commandment violation, for the record. While the first film covers the 12 hours leading up to his death, the sequel is expected to cover the days after his death, possibly intercut with scenes from Jesus in hell and the fall of Lucifer, which is a controversial doctrine, the idea that Jesus somehow went down to hell after he said it was finished. It wasn't finished, and he went down to hell to continue battling with Satan, and I guess, managed to escape hell like Aladdin from the Cave of Wonder or something like that. I'm not sure. Go over to Protesti to read more details about this, and you can get a link to the original report by Jordan Rumi about the upcoming production of the Passion of the Christ sequel. Next headline at Protesti: Illinois megachurch pastor starts new church 6 months after resigning over sexual abuse scandal. So you remember back in March of this year, we reported megachurch pastor resigns over allegations he concealed his son's sexual misconduct. This is Eastview Christian Church in Bloomington, Illinois, one of the biggest megachurches in the state. They announced during their Sunday service they've hired attorneys to investigate their church culture and practices. After a long time, senior pastor Mike Baker abruptly stepped down following allegations he covered up his son's sexual misconduct. Now, this supposed sexual misconduct was allegations against his son Caleb of possible abuse through letters purported to be written by adult victims of abuse. Former colleague of Caleb disputes this. She claimed that Eastview, let's rewind here a second. So the church and the pastor here, Mike Baker, said apparently that he had no knowledge of any of this, and yet a former colleague of his son Caleb said that Eastview, the church, knew full well that Baker was a cheating scumbag, that's Caleb Baker, but chose to conceal it and let him leave in peace rather than be confronted and exposed, saying that Caleb was let go. I guess he was on staff at the church, which you see this all the time in these mega churches, by the way. You see a pastor, vision caster, whatever, hire, like his whole family's working at the church on the payroll. It's quite the coincidence, isn't it, that God manages to call so many people from the same genetic, from the same part of the gene pool, all into vocational ministry at the same place at the same time. I mean, it's quite the coincidence, wouldn't you say? But I digress. So Caleb was let go after multiple women in the congregation came forward disclosing inappropriate sexual relationships he initiated. Instead of being honest and transparent, leadership chose to let our staff and congregation believe he was choosing to leave to join a new church staff instead of being terminated directly for his misconduct. So apparently, not only did they not address the conduct specifically, which would be the biblical way to do it, but I guess he just, went off to another church, no problem, no harm, no foul, just go somewhere else and start again. Central Christian Church Central Christian Church, which I guess is the place this guy went, Caleb went, announced that they fired Caleb. This was back in March. Central Christian Church announced they had fired Caleb, now the lead student pastor and associate preaching pastor, after catching him in an illicit sexual affair. So back in 2016, he gets fired. He's released from his church, this Eastview Christian Church in Bloomington. Gets fired from that church, but it's like, he's just leaving to go to work in another church. It's not that he did anything bad. He's just leaving. And then he goes to Central Christian Church over here and gets fired again for another illicit sexual affair. But at least it sounds like this church actually announced what it was. Although it looks like they've pulled the page down already, which of course we see this stuff happen all the time. That the church will go pull, they'll make an announcement, then once it's done, they'll pull it down. So apparently, you can go find it on the archive.org, I'm sure, if you want to. Following the announcement, 2 women associated with Eastview contacted Central Christian Church, asked why they hired him in the first place, knowing he was a predator with a storied history of failings, which took Central Christian Church's leadership aback. And they said, we were not informed of charges made against Caleb at Eastview when we hired him. Caleb's dad, this senior pastor here, Mike Baker, Caleb Baker's dad, apparently knew the people at Central Christian, and he was a peer, longtime friend. He did inform me there was an accusation made against his son by a woman But he assured me his leadership team had investigated the charge and it was proven to be unfounded. And so then when it was found out, it wasn't unfounded, and Caleb did the same thing in another church, and his dad didn't tell them the truth about what happened to begin with, Mike Baker steps down from Eastview Christian Church. And 6 months later, this was at Protestia Today, after Mike Baker stepped down 6 months, he has now joined another church or started another church. This happens all the time, apparently. 6 months after Mike Baker abruptly stepped down from his role leading one of the biggest megachurches in the state following allegations he had covered up his son's sexual misconduct, he has done what all fallen megachurch pastors do after being unceremoniously excised: start up a new church. So he resigned from Eastview in March. The investigation showed that by church hired attorneys at Eastview, the allegations that he and his son Caleb Baker engaged in gross misconduct happen to be true. It goes in the details here, and then Mike Baker announces after this, apparently, after all this, he resigns from his church, resigns from Eastview, and then goes on to start a new church he's now naming Song and Sword Church, and it will begin meeting at a hotel conference room. He insists he isn't competing with his former church, but will likely draw hundreds away for his first service. So there was a not to chase this too far, but there was a report in I don't remember if it was Christianity Today or some leftist leaning secular type media outlet indicating that megachurch growth was by and large transfer growth, that they weren't necessarily reaching new lost people, converting them to Christ and building their church that way. They were basically stealing congregants from other churches, drawing away people from old-fashioned fuddy-duddy churches. And it looks like that's probably going to happen again, although I would say the Eastview Christian Church was not an old fuddy-duddy church, but certainly another market-driven mega church, and Mike Baker will likely pull hundreds of people away from that church to his new hotel conference room starting church that he's calling Song and Sword Church. He said, "I've got to say this from the beginning. It's not about competing with Eastview with a clear conscience. The Holy Spirit is my witness. I can tell you I'm not seeking revenge. I don't hate Eastview. I don't hope they fail. I love Eastview Christian Church." Well, he has to say that, obviously, right? He has to say that. But the truth is that you're covering up sexual misconduct in your church. You're disqualified from the pastorate. You have no business going and starting another church. And it will likely suffer from similar problems because these guys, this is a career for them. It's not ministry. It's a career. It's a career path. It's a job. It's influence. It's very centered on them and not centered on gospel ministry. Read more at protestia.com. Thank you so much for joining me for this edition of the Intelligence Briefing for Tuesday, September 5th, 2023. Sorry we went a little long, but thanks for hanging out for the whole thing anyway. Read protestia.com for all the latest. We'll see you next time. As always, Semper Reformanda.